Hello, you're watching World Talks. My name is Sascha Fahrbach. Now, Russia is showing fresh signs of pressure at home, both at its banks and at its borders. Russians pulled around 24.4 billion euros from bank accounts in the first 7 months of 2026, while more than 20,000 people crossed into Georgia on Tuesday alone amid fears of economic instability and another military mobilization after September's parliamentary elections. Joining us now to discuss it all is Sergei Erofeev, sociologist at Rutgers University. Good to have you back with us here. Welcome.
Hello, Sasha.
So let's start with the banks first. I mean, this is a massive amount, over 24 billion euros. I mean, what does that tell us? Is this a complete loss of confidence? Can the Russian banks support this? Or just a really telling sign here? Are Russians sort of saying we've had enough?
Sasha, let's remember the very beginning of the war. In March 2022, there were multiple talks that soon we will face a bank panic and ATM run. That didn't happen because Russia has shown since then its resilience as a market economy. So this is a principal answer to the questions of those who want to compare the late Soviet Union with Russia today. Of course, today, Russia is much more authoritarian and ruthless state than it was even in 1980s because of one factor, because there is one mafia guy who wants to stay in power forever. And this guy has a certain set of priorities. One of them is to maintain the market economy where there is no deficit for the ordinary people and there's no fear that the state would confiscate people's assets, which finally, through a very slow process of, unraveling this war of attrition, now we see that the people, maybe not explosively, but still demonstrate exactly the behavior we expected from the very beginning of the war. And this is fundamentally about the distrust between the people and the state. The state defends itself, more precisely, Putin defends himself through initiating a serious war in order to stay in power. And the people try to employ other self-defensive strategies, not publicly protesting, but showing quiet resistance, quiet protest by trying to save their economic assets from the state, which they more and more consider to be predatory. The state which has betrayed the contract between itself and the people, which has lasted for many years, that we provide you economic stability and you do not interfere in anything political. So now we are finally facing that, and it's becoming more obvious for many observers.
Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting you said, I mean, movements of autocracy, saying that, this bank run seems to now be happening, these seizures as well. We've also heard of now, I think, some numbers here that I have, sort of Russian prosecutors transfer around the numbers about 51.5 billion in private assets to state control. That was in 2025. I mean, also in the subject of trust, I guess the translation from this would be, will that distrust, let's say, be enough to sway the outcome of those Duma elections, or are just some weeks away?
Oh, no way it will sway the outcome of the elections, because everything is under control there. There's no political force which can really change anything through the election mechanisms. And the party called Yabloko was the only party which reflected the dominant sentiment of the Russian population, which is anti-war sentiment, striving for peace. That party was not allowed to run for the elections. So that way we don't see anything. What we can expect is the continuation of tectonic shifts, which we do not see. And as you said, there is another indicator of domestic pressure. There is one after the other, and they keep coming year after year. Maybe economists will tell you much better how the war Keynesianism was successful for a couple of years for Putin's economy, and but now it's hitting a structural wall. That's an economic approach. But sociologically speaking, we continue to see how the fundamental interests of the state, which is mafia-run, and the ordinary people diverge. They indeed go in different directions. The people wanted modernization, all these technological pleasures that the future promises, but the state is now trying to save itself by sacrificing this modernization and progress.
Also interesting use of phrase there, saving itself. I mean, that's what some Russians want to do themselves. If we look at what happened on Tuesday at the borders there, not just going, I think, into Georgia, looking into the numbers here, about roughly 19,000, almost 20,000 on one single day. I mean, reminiscent very much of what we saw in 2022, where there's another fear of mobilization. I mean, that mobilization has not been officially announced yet, but the mere fear of it seems to have spurred people now to leave. What do you make of the exodus? Are we going to see more of that?
You know, it's, again, a war, which is a war of impression and perception in many, many ways. So that's the only area where Putin is more or less winning the hearts and minds of the leading figures in the West. He's making the impression that he's supported by his people and that he's successful on the battlefield. But also, for the ordinary people, it's more about perception. It's more about not kinetic fighting. These are not the people who go into revolution 100 years ago. They are very complacent. They're very consumerist. But they are easily frightened at a very weak signal, although there is no evidence that there will be another wave of mass mobilization after the elections. Many people try to act preventively. But at the same time, we should understand that the resources for them are very, very limited now. Those people who had the money, who were expected by someone in the West 4 years ago, they all gone. So those who still have the means to exit that way, their number is really going down. And what happened a couple of days ago, I think there was a rumor of avalanche at the Russian-Georgian border, and that's why there were huge lines waiting to cross. And now we hear that 20,000 people have finally crossed. So we don't exactly know what's going on there. And we for sure know that the Kremlin and Putin have various instruments to prevent people from leaving the country if they really need them for the war or for the war economy.
Yeah, and also interesting, as we mentioned, these are not the revolutionaries of the early 20th century. This is a consumer society, as you've said. They vote with their wallet rather with any other sort of revolutionary ideas. But I'm just curious, I mean, for such a long while, the war has been distant for many Russians. We now see, and they see themselves, how very real it is in terms of families being killed, in terms of the strikes which they've seen, from wild berries to the oil facilities. At what point, is there an inflection point in your mind at all of this? And what would that look like? What are some more signs we need to see for bigger change to come? Or will this fear just be channeled and pushed down, and the autocrats like Putin will remain?
Okay, there are two main factors why people are withdrawing the money from the banks. One, we already mentioned, that's the distrust to the government, to the state, which meant in this or other way freeze, confiscate their assets. The other, you just briefly mentioned that the infrastructure is becoming very vulnerable. Let's just recall how many mobile blackouts people have experienced recently, being not able to use their digital means of interactions. That's why they prefer cash now. But generally, answering the question when this will all end, the answer is still the same. There are three fronts of this war, and only these multiple pressures from all the three fronts can force Putin to change the situation. Well, basically, it's very unrealistic to expect him to step down because of these pressures. He has to disappear in some other way. We don't know whether there's a real chance of a palace coup in the situation of total surveillance, when two officials can't talk to each other about these kind of scenarios. But the three fronts remain the same. That's the Ukrainian resistance, the relative or not quite relative success of Ukrainians on the battlefield, like now the battlefield moved to the heartland of Russia, of course, because Russians experience Ukrainian strikes now. So the second front is Western solidarity in support of Ukraine in various forms, economic, military support. And number three is the Russian society, the invisible front. That's what we are increasingly talking about. And we see new indicators that the people are not the same as the state. And it's the time for the Western governments to acknowledge that, to see that the Russians are not equal the Kremlin and Putin. Yes, but the turning point we cannot expect now on this field, in this third front, exactly because there is no organizational force. Everything is extremely isolated. There is private discontent here and there about various matters, but only a combination of pressures on the second front and the third front, first and second, the Ukrainian and the West, only those pressures will create a new dynamics in the Russian society and will force the elites and the society to behave differently.
Mm-hmm. Right, indeed, and we're seeing that. I mean, major withdrawals now, run to the banks, fear, also people leaving, and it's very interesting points. But as you said, there are still various factors where all this has to come together if we are going to see an inflection point or not. We'll have to close it there. Always fascinating discussion with you. Thank you so much. That was Sergei Erofeev, there, sociologist from Rutgers University. Thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching World Talks, but do stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary throughout the day. Goodbye.